Hi everyone, welcome to the Psychology of Dating podcast. You're listening to Nadine Newkirk, me. I'm both a clinical psychologist and a dating coach. In today's podcast episode, I'm going to answer the question, how often should I see someone when I'm dating them? Before we jump into that, if you could help me out, if you are listening to this podcast on Spotify, or even if you're not, if you could rate the show using the star rating. So I'm at 42 currently. Might be different by the time you listen to this. I've got a mini goal of getting to 50 and a large goal of getting to 100 ratings. So if you have a friend next to you and you've already done the rating, if you could get them to jump on, listen to an episode, give it a rating, then we only need 7 people to hit that mini goal. And before you know it, we might actually reach the larger one. And that just helps the podcast have more visibility. It helps spread this podcast to more people over the world and also brings in more questions and topics that people want to hear when they email me for this podcast. And I'll also pop a link to that in the show notes. If you want to hear anything about this podcast, just jump into the show notes to my website and you can send me a question via the contacts page. Okay, how often should you see someone when you are dating them? And this question comes up quite frequently with the people that I see when I'm doing coaching or psychology sessions. First of all, I'll go into what happens if you see someone too little or too much. So imagine you've got a hobby. You really love playing the guitar or doing painting. There is a sweet spot of how much you can do to get the growth, to keep the ball rolling, to feel like you're inspired versus having it fizzle out. So at the moment, I've been learning guitar. Well, actually, I've had a guitar for the last 5 years. I have a background in learning piano in high school, so a little bit of musical background, but I've really wanted to play guitar always because you can take it wherever you want to go and there's lots of songs that you could learn that you hear on the radio, etc. I've been guilty of playing too little. So there's some songs that I've liked. I got a little bit of a momentum. At first it was really frustrating and I was building up the calluses on my fingers and I kept getting it wrong. And I started to get that little bit of excitement of it's starting to sound actually sort of like that tune. I then didn't play it for the last year and a half. I picked up the guitar, couldn't remember where to start. I was fumbling over everything. I just got frustrated super quick and, put the guitar down. It wasn't very motivating to pick it up again because I didn't even know anything to begin from. And that's the same if you're dating. If you see someone once and maybe you have a bit of a momentum, you have a bit of chemistry on that first date, but then you both kind of procrastinate or you have things on and you don't see each other for another 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks, you then lose that momentum. You can lose that interest and it's harder to pick up conversations. Have you ever had it where you've had a friend suddenly live on the same street as you or at the same workplace and you get to see them regularly? You get to see them 2, 3 times a week. The conversation can actually flow more because you're more involved in each other's lives and you really get to know each other on a deeper connection. So instead of just chit-chatting or catching up on the major things in people's lives, you might talk about, this funny thought that you had, or you might talk about this annoying event, which isn't a really large one, which you wouldn't cover if you only saw them every few months. And then they move away and they no longer live on your street. And you think, we'll have the same connection. It'll be the same. But actually you then get busier, lives get busy, and you don't see them as much. At first you make a bit more effort, maybe see them every few weeks, and then you're both busy and suddenly you haven't seen them for 3 months, 6 months. Can anyone relate to that? And the connection's still there, it's still good, maybe if you've had a long base, but it's not the same. Or if you were maybe new friends, maybe that connection actually fizzles. And we have to remember when you're dating, this isn't someone where you have a previous base. So even if you don't see them for 6 months, if you only have a 1-hour date to come back to, that's not much that you can keep building that connection from. So if you see them too little when you're dating, you don't get that momentum, you don't get to know them on a deeper level, they're not really involved in your life, and they're less invested, you're less invested. And there's a greater risk of the connection fizzling, of no progress happening, and also just not being excited, because sometimes you can even get more involved in other things in your life, whether it's work and friends, and that person gets put to the side, kind of like that book that's at the back of the bookcase and you've kind of forgotten about it. Whereas if you had it on the front of the bookshelf, you see it every day, you're like, oh yeah, I want to keep reading that. But what happens on the flip side of that? What if you see someone too much? What does that look like? Well, that's if you've been picking up that instrument and you're truly trying to learn a song, and instead of giving yourself that, consistent 30 minutes, an hour each day, every second day to practice and play, you're trying to do that 7 hours, that 14 hours all in one go. Imagine if you immerse yourself for 6 hours, you weren't eating properly, you weren't drinking properly, you forgot to go outside and get a bit of sunshine, you forgot to talk to your friends. What would happen is your well-being, your self-care starts to drop. You don't have balance in your life anymore. And you start to get irritated. You get to a point where you're oversaturated with that song. You can't hear that song one more time. Or you pluck the string too hard out of frustration and the string breaks. So this is what this looks like in dating, is you start to get irritated over the small things. So this is when you're seeing someone too much. Maybe you've gone on a date and you're overtired. You've gone after work and the first couple of hours were fun, but you're now 3-4 hours in and you're actually really tired. You really need to get to bed. Maybe you're really hungry, and their laugh starts to irritate you, or, a comment that they said, maybe it would feel invalidating slightly if you were well slept, but now it feels like 100 out of 100 because you're more sensitive, everything's more heightened. And really the things that you're irritated about don't matter that much in the long scheme of things, in the balance of things, but you do need a little bit of time away from this person to recenter, and then you won't feel as irritated by those things. There is also a psychology term called the recency effect. So this comes from studies where they showed that we remember something, usually like a first impression, and then also what happened last in an encounter. So for example, if you are studying for an exam and you've done lots of study, but then just before the exam, maybe 20 minutes before you go in, you just try and cram, they actually recommend not to do that, because then you might only remember the things that are recent, the things you crammed, and kind of forget the other stuff that you've prepped earlier on. And the same thing can happen on a date, where maybe you've had a really lovely date, you've gone for a walk and you've had a nice chat, but then you've kept going, you didn't want the date to end, you maybe have a bit of fear that if we don't hang out enough, then they're not going to want to hang out again. So I better just have a really long date to try and, lock them into wanting to be in a relationship straight away. I'm not saying this is a conscious thing, but sometimes unconsciously we can have this. And you end up walking for 5 hours and you're really tired, and maybe they're irritable because they're kind of over it, not because they're over you, but because they've just had too much of dose of this one activity, this one date. They need a bit of space, a bit of them time. And then maybe they kind of look a bit grumpy, or things feel a bit off before you leave. What will happen is that your brain will not remember the joyful time before. It will remember that feeling of you're both feeling a bit irritated, a bit off. And that could really then picture or colour, if you want to go on another date or not. So how often should you see someone when you go on a date, knowing this information that we don't want to overdo it and we don't want to underdo it? A few things will come into play. So there's some different circumstances. One, thinking about how ready are you for the connection that you want right now. If you're wanting a long-term committed relationship, maybe you're wanting children within the next 2 years, that's going to change the time and intensity of how much you want to dedicate to dating. If, for example, you wanted a baby in 2 years, then you might want to start trying in a year, and you're really wanting to get to know someone at least 6 months beforehand. If you're then only going on a date with someone once every month, you're only going to know them 6 encounters before deciding, do I want a baby with this person? That is not enough to kind of grow a connection and get to know someone. Or say, even if it's in a year, that's only 12 encounters. If you saw them 3 times a week, maybe it started at once a week, then it built up to 2 to 3 times, then maybe 6 months in, you moved in together, then you can start to build a connection and you really get to know, is this the person, that matches my values, matches what I'm wanting? Are they on the same page? Are they right for me? Or maybe you're on the other side where you're not wanting to put as much dedication into dating at the moment. You still want to, it's still something you're interested in, but maybe there's other things in your life, like you've got work priorities. Maybe you work in a hospital setting where you have to do lots of training and lots of exams, and you want to dedicate a lot to that. And it's okay for you if you don't have a long-term relationship or things like that. You just want to do casual dating. That might be okay then to go on a date once a month. That remembering the time you put in the investment will equal how much the relationship can grow, but not overdoing it. So a circumstance where you might overdo it, you might live in a student college, where you see someone 3 times a day for meals, then maybe there's parties and social events 4 or 5 times a week. Maybe you live on the same corridor. That is a lot of opportunity for oversaturation. So in those circumstances, you really want to consciously carve space. So it's consciously sitting next to someone different, maybe when you go down for a meal, or purposely having an event with friends that's not in a college event, so you have a bit of time away from that person, because you're doing the connection a favor if you have time away. If you've gone off, fulfilled other areas of your life where you feel achieved, satisfied, maybe you've got your health, you've gone for a run, you've seen some friends, you've done a work project, you've got some good balance there, you're going to be the best version of you going on that date with that person, which will help the connection grow. Versus you spend all your time with that person and then the other areas of your life drop. And that means just generally overall your battery will get lower, and that's going to affect the relationship. An example of this can come from Davidson's theory. So his theory was on relationships, and that was in 1991. He called them the A-frame and the H-frame relationships. So I want you to, if you have a pen and paper, draw an A, capital H, or draw it in the air so you can get a visual of this. If you have a H-frame relationship, you've got 2 lines that are going vertical and 1 horizontal connecting them. So these represent, the vertical lines represent you and the other person you're dating, and the horizontal line connects you in the relationship. So this can be a healthy relationship where the one line, which is you, has your independence, has balance in your areas of life, you know your values, you know your self-care, you have goals in different areas and in relationships. It means if something happens in the relationship, maybe the other person gets sick and they get really grumpy and they're a bit off, it might still affect you, but you're not going to completely fall down. You have other areas in your life that you can lean on and get satisfaction and joy from. Versus the A-frame relationships. So this is where you have 2 lines that are kind of slanted and leaning on each other, and then a line that's connecting them. So this represents codependence, where when things are perfectly in balance, things are great. So this could be where you're hanging out and you're like, this is so much fun. You're hanging out every single day and you're doing fun activities, but then something in one person changes. Maybe they lose their job, or maybe they hurt their knee and they can't, do the regular hobbies. Maybe you did lots of active hobbies, and suddenly things have been shaken up. And if they fall, you fall with them, because you don't have balance, you don't have your independence. If you don't have any other hobbies or friends or joy from work, then if you don't get joy from hanging out with that person, maybe they're in a bit of a low spot or an anxious spot, you're going to crash with them. So this is important to think about when you're quantifying how often should I see someone, thinking about, do I have enough coins to still spend in other areas of my life? Am I putting a little bit towards my values, whether that's valuing education, learning, studies, work, whether it's valuing community, going to group events, whether it's valuing health. There can be various different things and types of values that come out for you in this point in life. And it's important that you have some energy, some time to spend on those things, and then carving out some room for a relationship, depending on how much you want to dedicate to it. So I'll give you an arbitrary number, at least once a week when you're first dating. And then you can vary that depending on the type of relationship you want. So if you meet someone and you enjoy hanging out with them, if you see them once a week, that might be good. Sometimes where you might want to see them more initially is if you've had really short dates. Maybe you've just had an hour coffee date and it's been very casual. Maybe it was a work colleague and you had it at a work lunch and you had more chit chat, not deeper connections. Maybe you want to do different varieties of dates and maybe make some dates longer. So maybe you do some dates just you two for a couple of hours. Maybe you do different activities. The dates could be in public spaces. If you get to know someone and feel comfortable, then maybe you have a dinner at one of your houses where you feel more comfortable to talk about deeper emotions or things like that. So giving yourself some variety of dates where you might just have fun and get some banter and show that side of things, and ones where you can show other sides of yourself, different emotions, different kind of levels of that emotional connection as well. A time where you might want to do less than once a week, if you've, for example, just been on a really intensive date, maybe you've been on a weekend away with someone and it took 2 or 3 days. That was great. You had an opportunity to really grow the connection. And then it might be time afterwards to have, a couple of nights, a few nights where you go off and do your own thing. Maybe you really enjoy playing hockey. Maybe you enjoying having a night in by yourself and reading a book. Whatever it is that you get some recharge from doing that activity and then organising the next date. The last tip I want to leave you with is when you are figuring out how often to see someone in dating, make sure that the focus is on you and how you feel rather than trying to guess what the other person wants. It can be tempting to think, oh, maybe I'll scare this person away if I see them, twice a week. So I'm not going to ask for that. I don't want to rock the boat. What that does is it actually might enable a connection where someone maybe has some commitment phobias. And it doesn't mean that over time they'll just get more used to it. They might, but they also might not. And if you are feeling comfortable with them, you want to get to know them more, you're finding that you miss them and seeing them once a week isn't enough anymore, use those emotions, use those clues, and then organise to see them a bit more. Or if you're feeling, a bit antsy, maybe a bit irritated, you're finding that you're craving doing things just for you, listen to that and maybe make a little bit more space. The key is just to communicate that with the other person. So notice what you feel and then adjust that for how often you see them and then communicate that to them. So it might be, oh, this was an awesome weekend away. I actually got a few things I want to do. I really want to go to that hockey game. But how about I'll see you, at the end of the week on Friday, we can do blah, blah. It's amazing when you give a little bit of communication, how that can help everyone just settle into whatever rhythm you have in how often you see each other. If you want more space, but you see them and then you just don't contact them for the next date, that might actually spike anxiety, or they might think you're not interested and move on. That it's actually better to communicate when you want to see them next, and then you can both actually enjoy that space more. Okay, everyone, it was lovely talking with you all. Hope you have a lovely day or night wherever you are.